Very good afternoon. Welcome to our session. So after lunch, second day, that is maybe a very, very tough, problematic session. But I'm very happy that you are here. So thank you very much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to moderate this very distinguished panel. Welcome to our speakers here in the room and at the screen. Greetings to Paris. I think it's Paris. Wonderful. So yeah, I mean, we heard before lunch, we heard a talk about Poland, what is going on there. Now the focus is more on, yeah, still remains on Central and East Europe, but we will tackle a little bit the cases, the situation in three other countries, which are Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. So it will be very, very interesting. And we have Professor Alemanno with us, who gives us a little bit, I would say, the academic or activist bird's perspective. So without further doing, let me start with a quite general question. And I would say, in this case, ladies first. General question to all of you. How do you evaluate the results of in June, early June, the European elections for your respective countries? Specifically, I mean, considering the situation, the stability of democracy, pro-European situation. Let's start with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the Hungary is always an interesting case, so there's always makes sense to speak about that. This is what we can thank for Viktor Orbán. And this European election was also interesting in Hungarian terms, both within the country and also within the EU. If I want to be short, the EU level is that Viktor Orbán's party, as you all probably know, he was, the party faction was basically kicked out from the EPP, the European People's Party, a couple of years ago. So Fidesz, Orbán's party, was in nowhere's land for a couple of years. So obviously that's a very weak position within the EU, especially if you're a governing party. So Fidesz made a lot of effort to join one of the other parties more on the right from EPP. The first idea was to join to ECR. Interestingly, ECR was not interested in receiving Fidesz within its members. So the identity party group, Democracy and Identity, led by Le Pen, the French party, the Rassemblement National, was actually the one where they were supposed to move, or as a last resort. There, Orbán could make a rather successful trick, basically pulling out some of the parties behind the French party, the leading French party, and creating a new group where actually the big French party also had to join. And this is the Patriots, whatever exactly they are named at the moment. So this is basically an interesting scenario, demonstrates how Orbán's party was actually isolated. Still, they could get out the most from the given situation. I think that definitely shows talent of Orbán moving around in the European landscape. And then we're going to see now how this group will operate, not giving too much specific function, but still being significantly large. It's now the third largest group within the EU, so it's definitely important. And Fidesz now in the second largest party. And because of this maneuver, it's actually a meaningful second largest party. In Hungary, there were completely different dynamics. Interestingly, it was also more interesting than typically European elections are. The first important thing was that Fidesz party received actually significant less votes than ever before. So though Fidesz party won this election with 44%, which it's a significant majority, this was way lower than how much Fidesz usually get in European elections, which was always in the last couple of years beyond 50%. So both Fidesz and the analysts regard this as a kind of loss of interest. And those who know Hungarian politics, we know that this was not without reason. Fidesz went through a significant series of scandals in the last 1 year, and this was reflective in losing votes. On the other hand, opposition parties, the ones that we know so far, almost disappeared from the scene. A new political actor entered to the Hungarian politics called Péter Magyar. A one-man show originally, within a couple of months, created a massive support base, and he got more than 30% of the votes at the European elections, which is a proportional election. So now the Hungarian opposition is actually significantly changed. And there is now, ever first after 14 years, a kind of measurable support behind someone else than Viktor Orbán. So these are definitely important changes, which were not European scale, but of course, any significant change in Hungarian politics is interesting and can be important.
Thank you. May I ask maybe, or may I give you an additional question, maybe within 1 or 2 minutes answer? The same day in early June, you had local elections here in Hungary. I think that was not a coincidence. I mean, that belongs to our topic here. That's why I'm referring to that. Can you maybe comment on that as well? So local elections, there was an idea behind, I have the impression, to take the same day for the European elections and the local elections here in Hungary.
Sure. The European elections were held on the same day. Municipality elections, which were brought half year earlier than they were due, which was, again, a very Orbanist move of maneuvering to benefit from pulling these two elections together. As we know, a Fidesz party is more supported in rural regions and in the countryside, where they could mobilize better during municipality elections than at the European elections, which are typically, there are higher turnout in cities. So this was an important reason to do so. And while we probably behind this 44% of the EU elections, it's also the result that there were more mobilization at the smaller settlements in Hungary. There are also the big loss of the opposition parties was also tangible at the municipal election in many different ways. The city of Budapest, which was a clearly opposition-led city so far with the leadership of Gergely Karácsony, there is no single majority at the moment, so it's a very confused political situation, which obviously will be a complicated governing position for anyone actually who is now leading Budapest.
Thanks. I think this, let's call it calendar policy, tells us something as well. Now, I'm very curious about the Romanian case, Mr. Muraru. So I'm very curious since we in Prague, Naumann Foundation Prague, we are covering 8 countries here in Central Europe, amongst others, Hungary and Slovakia. We are not covering, unfortunately, Romania. That's why it's a very interesting case for me as well. Plus, you are facing general elections, parliamentary elections and presidential elections. So for Romania, I think it's a super election year. So what did the results, which signals gave the results specifically for the upcoming elections in November and December, I think?
First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and I want to congratulate the CEO and the partners for organizing this event. I was in Budapest the last time, and 15 years ago, even if we are neighbors, and I strongly believe that the general climate and environment right now is a fear and pressure, not on the personal level, but I mean, it's something which is not happening in Romania, even if we have a lot of problems. And looking back with 15 years ago, we and my country, we were with many years, back of Hungary. So this means that in the last 15 years, the Hungarian democracy also degraded in a very particular way. Well, coming back to your question, I would say that European elections in Romania, the results of European elections looks quite well from a democratic point of view, because from 33 seats, democratic parties also won 25. This means that it's something very important, and that the ruling coalition, larger coalition from the main parties, Social Democrats and National Liberals, won almost 50% of the votes. So the extremist forces, this means two parties, got 8 mandates. Maybe this is more, but looking back before the electoral campaign, I would say that in the period before elections, there was even talk of the extremist victory in the European Parliament elections, which would have provided an incredible boost for the parliamentary and presidential elections. So it's not this case right now. Another measure was the merging the European Parliament and local elections. I know that we were 7 states, including Hungary, which made this move. But in case of Romania, it was an official move of the two parties reversing their engines to the maximum extent necessary, not only to achieve a good score, but which kept Romania political stable and a core member of the EU. So extremist parties with no structures in the field were thus blamed for the possibility of turning the European Parliament election into a tribune of Euroscepticism and populist nationalism. So the joint mobilization of the traditional parties was a strategy to preserve political stability. Liberal parties like my party, PNL, have managed to retain a solid base of supporters despite significant challenges related to disinformation and populism. So European elections and local elections, I believe that they'll have a great impact for the general elections and presidential elections in this autumn. We will have 3 consecutive weeks every Sunday with elections, with general elections, and 2 turns for presidential elections. And I believe that the way in which we merged the European and local election allow us to protect the Romanian democracy for the victory of extremists.
Thank you, Mr. Valášek. Now we need to talk about your country, about Slovakia. I saw the day after the elections in June, I saw a map, European map, with where the countries had the colors of the most successful parties in their respective countries, and Slovakia was the only country with yellow. So this panel is about liberalism in a very philosophical, general sense, but I mean, yellow, that was then the Liberal Party, and in this case, the pro-democratic, pro-European party, after 2 less successful elections, the parliamentary elections in last September in your country, and then 2 rounds of presidential elections back in, that was, I think, the week before and after Easter in March, April. So the European elections, the result were quite positive for pro-democratic, pro-European, pro-market, whatever movement. What is your takeaway, your comments about that?
Thanks for the question, and many thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, we won. We sent the largest delegation in Slovakia's history, so the share was the biggest in Slovakia's history. We have 6 people in the European Parliament, and we won with the highest turnout in the European parliamentary elections ever in Slovakia. So this wasn't a fluke down to low turnout. Now, this is the good news. I'm not bragging. There were specific circumstances that led to the victory. Let's touch on 2 or 3 of those. The European election was the 3rd in a cycle of electoral super cycle. We had parliamentary elections in September, presidential elections in June, and then, presidential elections in March, and then European elections in June. And in many ways, the European parliamentary elections were sort of a rematch of the previous two. So what part of the reason that explains the high turnout and our victory is the dissatisfaction among the liberal voters, the democratic voters, with the results of the parliamentary and the presidential elections, which had not gone our way, and a sense that we have to show them this is not their country, right? This is where we make a stand. This election we're going to win because this is our country as much as theirs, and we have the numbers to prove it. We may not have been able to prove it in the presidential and in the parliamentary elections, but this is the moment, and by God, we did. They did, our voters. We prevailed despite the assassination attempt at the prime minister, which only happened 10 days, less than 2 weeks before the so 15th of May, so there were 3 weeks before the parliamentary elections. We assumed, I'll be completely honest, that this might swing the election the way of Robert Fico. It didn't in the end, for reasons that I can only speculate on. We had tried to delve into it a little bit, but essentially the way that Robert Fico and the people around him tried to instrumentalize the assassination attempt to marginalize the opposition, blame it on the opposition with no evidence whatsoever, actually had the effect of mobilizing our voters. They realized, wait a minute, this man our voters have always seen him as a threat to democracy, but they've now realized he truly is capable of everything. If you're going to be so cynical as to actually sort of try to link the opposition with no evidence to his own assassination and make this the assassination sort of a litmus test of his own popularity, he's capable of everything. So that actually had a mobilizing effect on our opposition, on our voters. There was a sense of we really now have to demonstrate and draw the line here and demonstrate he doesn't control this country. See, Slovakia is a deeply polarized and deeply divided country, like many in Europe these days, but it's also a very evenly divided country. The government has a majority of 4 in the parliament. That's less than fit in a sort of a Trabant or Fiat Punto. They won the presidential elections. They and the candidates did, but they won it with the smallest margin in Slovakia's in the history of Slovak presidential elections. That's both in numerical term and in terms of percentage. So again, what mobilized our voters was a sense that, by God, these were 2 close losses. We know as a country that the results do not reflect Slovakia as a whole. There is a huge electorate here, 1.2 million voters out of 5.4 that the opposition candidate Ivan Korčok received in the presidential elections. Surely, we have to draw the line and show this is our country as well. And that's really what animated the elections, explains both the higher turnout and our victory.
Thank you. We will go more into detail in the second round, but let me then finalize the first round. Mr. Alemanno in Paris, I introduced to you. So you are in Paris, you are based in Paris. I think you have Italian roots. So you are a kind of pan-European phenomenon. You are activist, you are professor, you are less politician, but so you can bring a different perspective for us. So I'm from Germany, so that means we are covering then some very, very important states, founding states of the European community at that time. So what would be your comment, not specifically on France, but in general on the situation in the European Union after the elections in early June?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a few reflections on the outcome of the European elections and their meaning for the next policy cycle that is opening up in Brussels. And let me say that, the European elections in 2024 reveal once more 27 parallel elections, probably more even than in the past, or more than 5 or 10 years ago. We have been seeing every single national political contest to debate about largely different things from different perspectives. National parties have been not necessarily making a lot of reference to their European political parties, so the vote was not very intelligible to the average European voter. Very few people knew that by voting, I don't know, a particular party, a particular liberal party in one country, they were voting for another liberal party in another. And of course, the reshuffling that has occurred after the vote has only confirmed the fact that voting for the European elections remains quite unclear to most of us, even the insiders. This is due to the fact that after 70 years of unprecedented socioeconomic integration, in Europe, we still lack a European party political competition that allows citizens to see that there are different visions of Europe being presented to them. The electoral law remains essentially the same. It is a proportionate system, as has been alluded to by my fellow panelists. But overall, each country is interpreting that particular electoral system in a particular way. When it comes to the outcome, I would say the big storyline ahead of the vote was that the euro was about to face a Trump moment. The right or the far right for the first time would have gained a majority. Never before the European Parliament would have been or has been, let's say, driven by the far right. This did not reveal true. Most of us observers argued that the center, meaning the mainstream party, somehow maintain the center. But the real truth is that both narratives are true. On the one hand, we have been seeing mainstream parties remain in control, if we can put it that way, and they manage the center of gravity of the political power of the parliament. But at the same time, their political capital has been shrinking to the benefit of the right and far right in particular. So all the parties on the right of the EPP are very well represented. We are talking about approximately 26% of the entire parliament. This is pretty much unprecedented. And this is possibly what today reflects in the composition of the new European Commission, which is the most far right or right-wing parliament commission, college of commissioners ever created, but which is much more to the right than what the European Parliament is. We're talking about 17 out of 27 commissioner designate who belong to the EPP or to the right of the EPP. And this is clearly giving a bit of a sense of direction of this von der Leyen Commission, which appear extremely pragmatic and potentially ready to move away from the idea of a community of values, what the European Union has been over the past 70 years, to a geostrategic, geopolitical entity that's tried to basically follow or chase both the United States and China. The Draghi report, which came after the European election, seemed to be the blueprint. I don't think that it will be entirely followed. I'm rather skeptical about the idea that the Draghi priorities, not including those on competitiveness, will become the mantra for this next European Commission, but there will be some cherry picking. And this will be the major, there is no alternative approach that the new von der Leyen Commission, I think, would be presenting to us. I have a lot more to say about Italy. I have a lot more to say about France, but it's pretty clear that we are witnessing a moment of political vacuum in Europe. We don't see major leadership coming from the traditional countries, which creates opportunity for Central European countries who have a vision for Europe, and they are willing to somehow project that. However, I see very little political willingness to actually project political capital into the European project. So we see a European Union, notably a European Commission, which appears reactive as opposed to proactive to the many challenges facing Europe in a very geopolitically shattered world.
Great, thank you. I mean, leadership is one keyword that could be very interesting to debate about that. When it comes to military leadership, I think Poland is playing more and more a very important Poland before lunch. So maybe we come back to specifically two of our countries who are represented here, Hungary and Slovakia again. I mean, let me maybe ask. So the influence of the social media, I depended about media yesterday as well, so that is always very present, but influence of social media, so that played, I think, a significant role in all elections, recent elections in Slovakia. was influenced by Russian. Maybe you can comment a little bit about that, which role they played and which role they will play now in the upcoming future. That will be a future, I think, 2 years without elections in your country. So that's a chance and a risk at the same time.
It's a bit more nuanced picture about the role that Russia has played in the 2 elections that the pro-Russian populist won, the parliamentary and the presidential ones. And my sense is, they're mostly homegrown reasons why the populists dominate. It's the failures of the government before the populist won, and it's also historical reasons. The long-running affinity towards Russia that's borne out by the Poles going back decades. This has nothing to do with the present government. So that's a long way of saying that the Russians are almost certainly trying to influence social media. The Russian embassy in Slovakia is among the most active in all of the European Union in a number of statuses, just a sheer churn on its Facebook site. But even if it didn't exist, I suspect Smer still would have won the elections. Okay, the social media are divided. So Facebook is very much a populist affair. When you look at the popularity of the politicians on Facebook, it's the populist and extremist, even so hard or right. If you consider Fico hard right, he paints himself as a social democrat. He isn't anymore. When you look at the rhetoric, his sexual policy stance, he is now, by any sense of the word, hard right. He's no longer even a member of the Socialist and Progressive Party. He's been suspended by it precisely because of his alliances, electoral and otherwise, with extremists. So if you take Fico as hard right, he's really strong and his people on Facebook. But the extreme right is just as much. On Instagram, strangely enough, the more liberal voices are more popular. There's also a generational gap. Facebook, I'm being told I'm 52. So when I say old, I refer to myself. I'm being told that Facebook is for old people like me, 52 and above, whereas Instagram is for younger. So we tend to have a much better success among younger generations. So that reflects the fact that Instagram is more favorable to us. Telegram is rising in popularity. It's become a real force, particularly after some of the extremists were banned from Facebook. Moved to Telegram and took their following with them. Twitter, still largely democratic affair. So it's a pretty nuanced picture. What role will they play going forward? Bigger and bigger. Among other things, because the government in place is trying to do its best to control state-run media and private media as well. They have passed a law that essentially gives the culture ministry, meaning the current coalition in power, the ability to fire the head of public broadcaster, and surely they wasted no time and appointed somebody loyal. So as the public broadcaster and private broadcasters as well, on who they have leaned via advertising contracts and cross ownership. The owners of some of the biggest independent and in the past fairly critical TV, Markiza, the owners also do business with the government. So the government used that to lean on the owners. Markiza is no longer as critical of the government as it used to be. All of this adds up to social media and digital television playing an increasingly bigger role. So a lot of journalists have left their jobs in both private and public broadcasters. And there's at least 2, there may well be more, I'm looking at my colleagues and assistants here, but at least 2 projects that I know of, digital behind paywall, sadly, so they will limit their effect. They're starting up, but the trend in Slovakia is towards people abandoning traditional media and relying more and more so on social media and on digital platforms. The latest number I heard is that fewer than 50% of people read newspapers or watch traditional TV, meaning you turn on the TV set. These days, more than 50% of people get their news via social sites or via digital platforms of various forms, whether digital TVs or digital newspapers. And the trend on the social networks I've described, the trend among the digital media is, again, because so many good critical minds have been pushed out of the public broadcaster and out of the previously the private broadcasters previously critical of the government, the digital media tends to be anti-government because that's become the refuge for those critical journalists who have been fired or have left their jobs in the state-run media.
Let's maybe come back for a while to Kibros leadership. So, I mean, you mentioned that, Mr. Alemanno, leadership, lack of leadership in Germany for sure. In France, I mean, President Macron has some problems because of the elections and because of his decision to dissolve then the Assemblée Nationale, and now he needs to leave with results. So lack of leadership. And this famous traditional German-French motor or engine doesn't work. Maybe I ask first, come back to the Hungarian case. So leadership, I mean, we have someone here in Budapest who is a leader as well, who is considered to be a leader as well, but not in a productive, pro-European, etc. way. So, and I mean, he's having his, and he's working on his, maintaining and working on his European and extra-European networks as well. So how would you evaluate that? How dangerous is that lack of leadership, be it in Paris, be it in Berlin, be it in London, is not part anymore of the, unfortunately, I might say, not part anymore of the European Union. How dangerous is that for the stability of the European Union, this kind of leadership and this character and figure?
Thank you for the question. And of course, I'd like to come back to what Alberto said a couple of minutes ago about where the European Union is actually heading in the future and what this outcome of the EU elections and the 17 right-wing leaders in the Commission would actually mean. And I think there are a couple of really interesting processes to watch. And then, of course, that's lead to the leadership question, because as Alberto said, there is a vacuum in leadership at the European level. And this gives a room for not only Viktor Orbán, to many other people, especially ones who are more risk takers, who are more unscrupulous, who have more ideas. So this is also a positive and, well, destructive position. Well, I wouldn't say right away, if I can be provocative, that Viktor Orbán is a destroyer of the EU. He actually wants to change the EU. He expressed it several times, and he uses the vacuum typically rather talented way to push it in one way to another. So it's whether he is not in a bigger and influential political group, he is a prime minister there. He will have a commissioner like all other countries. And if we see where the major priority areas were in the last 5 years, then we can suggest that this will definitely change in the future. So if we would analyze what would come with the Green Deal, I think this is really a contested. It will be contested. There will be no Green Deal as we know it today, because in the last 1-2 years, it started in the Netherlands and then all over Europe, it became a top political divisive issue, much more than the climate change as we knew it like 3 or 5 years ago. So there's a new aspect. It's a different way politicized, and then more right-wing parties who actually profited from the anti-Green Deal issues, they will have a say. So I think there will be changes there. Migration is definitely another issue like this. The EU was not able to come up with a unified proposal and a solution package. It's absolutely super polarizing. It's an existential question. It's very, very political. It's nothing technical on it any longer. So know that the Netherlands is pulling out from the deal on top of some Eastern European countries which were not supporting the EU migration package anyway. That's just get even more complicated. Ukraine. Well, Ukraine, therefore, the EU was rather unified so far. I think that was really a big success. For many, the war became the ultimate question of the future of Europe. I think it was like this until this summer. We will see how it formulates itself in the next couple of months. Obviously, US election is an issue here, but it's also various other, how European countries and those who are front runners to presenting that Russia is a major threat for Europe, how their position will be in the future. So that definitely will remain an important issue. But if we just look at Orban, he is demonstrating a new policy, which he calls so far connectivity. However, he announced in his summer speech that they will figure out a better term because it's too complicated and they don't speak complicated way. Now they call it connectivity. It's basically Orbanist foreign policy in the last 15 years, opening to the east, maneuvering between various global powers, emerging powers, powers which are considered by this party like declining powers, like the West. So this is not only Hungary. I mean, Hungary here, again, is placed with a number of other European countries. We related to China, it's Germany, which is definitely a major partner. So many things what Orban is talking about is actually a German interest as well. So he oftentimes speaks for other people and for other countries. So he's not so lonely as he seems to be. So the global position of the EU is an issue. And this is, I think, will remain or will become even more on the agenda of the EU. And it's interesting how other parties who might, or from other countries who might not be so visionary, you know, would relate to that. And just the final word on this competitivity, which you mentioned, Alberto, maybe is this the absolute minimum consensus, right? So while this is a main topic of the Hungarian presidency, most probably because this was the only thing everyone agrees that this should be done. Of course, a big question is how. And as from that moment, there is no consensus at all.
So you were referring to many, many topics, for instance, Ukraine, war in the Ukraine, immigration, automotive industry. We can then add maybe the gender or the Green New Deal. We can add the gender issue, energy supply and so on and so forth. So many, many items, many topics, which leads to a very, very hard polarization of many European societies, of the European society, but of the societies in many, many countries. How is that in Romania? I mean, I'm quite sure all these topics were topics in the election campaign as well. Will be there. Are they very, very, is Romania a very polarized society as well? What will we see over there in November and December?
I would say there is a polarized society, as many other Central European countries are. Regarding the issue of war of aggression against Ukraine by Russian Federation, in the last 2 years, it was very clear that extremists, power leaders, and parties also in Romania also played the role to support the Russian Federation interests. Unfortunately, the Romanian institutions, prosecutors, magistrates, police, and other institutions ignored this issue. I mean, they did not make any serious investigation regarding the source of money, the source of other resources that they use, because all of the analysts and also a big part of the society also expressed this fear that their resources are huge. And as parliamentary parties, also they cannot also prove the real source of money. What, in my opinion, is something very bad for Romanian society, and maybe for Slovakia. In Hungary, it's much more complicated, is that it was a general idea that we have to ignore them. We have to ignore extremists, we have to marginalize them, we have to aware and our behavior to be as they are not exist. And this was a huge mistake in the last 2 years, because, for instance, maybe according to the polls right now, they are around 15 to 20% of the votes. Last year, according to the polls, they were around 25 or even 30. So this means that it's very fluid situation, and also the war is in Ukraine is still a big source of propaganda for extremist parties, because they are using all the debates in the Romanian society regarding if we have to put down the drones or not, if we have to give them more money and a Patriot system or not, if we have to give them more resources or not. All of these themes, topics, and subjects are used in a propaganda, and taking into consideration that in the last couple of years we had a lot of crisis, energy crisis, pandemic crisis, health crisis. Also, they use this fuel in all the political debates.
Maybe Mr. Alemanno, you can help us a little bit with the polarization, how to deal with that. So polarization in on many fields. Some were mentioned. I mean, the idea of parliamentarism is to exchange arguments, to find a solution in a well-tempered way. Let's put it like that, in a very civilized way. Now we have this polarization on energy, on Ukraine, on whatever gender. Is there still a chance then to bring together these polarized situations? I mean, the ones who are using, not to say misusing, this polarization are the extremists, be it a former Marxistic leader who is now with right-wing parties, or the other way around. I mean, extremists or radicals, so they are misusing that, and they're destroying this culture of a democratic deliberation, so to say. So what is your comment on that?
I think it's important to focus on the role that political parties play, both at the national and at the European level, and the image they have of themselves. We have been seeing over the past few years mainstream parties struggling to be voluntarist, trying to provide a vision for society is no longer their business. They rather react to what society is shaping, asking for, transforming, therefore leaving new political windows of opportunity for other parties, in this particular moment, populist party, both on the right and on the left, to actually play a more instrumental approach. So we see parties capable of shaping cleavages, of pushing people to take a stance, being on the political systems, therefore pushing for anti-establishment positions, saying that all politicians are necessarily against them, or simply highlighting or blaming factors that might not necessarily be the most important one. I think AfD mobilizing the migration issues in Länder where you have the lowest number of migrants speak for itself. So this ability of some parties, notably on the right and far right in this particular moment, to capture the collective imagination by projecting themselves as those parties capable of protecting what people want, what people have been knowing for long, providing also reassurance on material issues as opposed to socio-cultural issues. Mainstream parties, both on the center left and center right, couldn't resist. They spent the last 20 years capturing the imagination of their electorate on socioeconomic issues. They said, this is the target audience we have. That's what we have to do. By forgetting, in particular, the Social Democrats, that in reality, the material conditions are still the issues that drive the vote in most of the European countries. And the revenge of history came with far-right parties like epitomized by AfD, but also the Brothers of Italy, and of course, Rassemblement National in France and many other countries, really occupying that space. So how do you envision the role of a party today is possibly what is making a difference in Europe and elsewhere?
I mean, you were talking about, parties, classical parties, parties based on an ideology losing their profile. I mean, in this case, in this context, the Hungarian case is interesting as well. So, I mean, there are, I might say, well, let's put it like that. The classical parties, the liberal one, the social democratic one, they didn't play a significant role in the past European elections, at least. So we had then the Orban camp, and we have then an anti-Orban, but from the Orban camp. So that's a kind of movement as well. So the party of Mr. Magyar is not a classical party, I might say. That is a movement. That is a movement of protestation. Or how would you evaluate that? And what could it mean for the Orban system here and for democracy, indeed?
Well, Péter Magyar's party called TISA is an anti-establishment movement. It's the major characteristics. But of course, it matters that he is one from Fidesz because he knows some of the Fidesz tricks and tactics which he can use against themselves. And also, he also demonstrating something which is a kind of at least perceived as a heroism because he left Fidesz, and not many people leave Fidesz. Actually, not many step up on the stage after leaving Fidesz. So these are very important elements for those who rise so quickly, so high, as Julia Sonevend explained us this morning with the charm. So I think so far what we see is a very typical anti-establishment movement, anti-establishment against Fidesz and against the existing opposition. So it's a kind demonstrates how Hungarians, many of them are fed up with everyone who is on the political scene. And of course, this is very important to learn about because this is also true for many other anti-establishment parties in many other countries. I mean, Slovakia has a number of anti-established parties from time to time, and they can even reach power much easily because of the proportional nature of your electoral system. So this is not a new phenomenon, not even an Eastern European phenomenon. We saw it in France, we see it in the Netherlands and many other places. So this is with us, and these parties are nothing to do with ideology any longer. So we have no idea what kind of ideology or some kind of semi-ideological profile Péter Magyar will have at some point. I mean, he has some of himself, but he has a liberal Budapesting voting base. So it's complicated. So I think this is something very important we have to know about European political parties, that also as a political institution, political parties are just breaking down, and less formal ideological political party exists, which is also visible in the European Parliament. And I'm very much interested in how this ECR and patriotic parties will play out in the future, because many of them are just basically anti-establishment parties and not very strong profile. So I think that's an interesting thing again to see. This is not, it's a bit troubling, of course, because ideologies give some kind of anchor for a party. And if you don't have any, then you can be anything and anyone. And of course, that's dangerous in politics because this is unpredictable. And I think that we also have to face this new phase of European or global politics, that parties can be anything. And this also comes to the connectivity thing, that if you are not ideologically concrete, then you can ally with whoever you want. You can drop this alliance, in a couple of years, and then you can ally with others. So the whole thing is getting to be a bit more unpredictable. And this is how we should be actually smarter than what we were in the last years. So it's a complicated environment.
So yeah, party as an anchor, what was your word, I think, as an anchor of stability of a democratic system or society, of the European system and society. So that is losing more and more power, I would say. Another, let's say, institution which is losing power are borders. My question here, that might be a minor aspect, but I think it has a specific relevance. I mean, let's call it imperial policy of Viktor Orban. I mean, showing from time to time Hungary in the bigger shape. Which includes then some neighboring countries. I mean, is that just to mobilize his voters, or is that something that is a question for our friends here, for our panelists from Romania and Slovakia as well? In Slovakia, Mr. Fico is very close to Orban, but is that a topic? I mean, seeing what is going on in Eastern Europe with Russia and the Ukraine, that Mr. Orban could have the idea one day then maybe to correct the borders as well. Is that a topic? I mean, he's very active in minority policy in neighboring countries. What is your comment on that? Maybe we start with Romania. Slovakia.
I think Romania had in his past this danger to have an authoritarian leader. And it was the same case with Hungary, because I want, and I have to make this comment, it's very hard for Hungary right now, holding the EU presidency, to put some important issue on the agenda. Romania had the same situation in 2019, when a criminal convicted leader also, it was the leader of the main party in the government. And also this role to have the EU presidency was completely neglected. Romania was at that moment a very marginalized country, as Hungary is right now. So it's quite impossible to transform this project of EU presidency for a half of a year, for 6 months, into a great project. Even if Mr. Viktor Orban made some travels to Romania in the last weeks in order to promise the Romanian Prime Minister that Hungary will be one of the biggest supporters for Romania in our goal to become part of the Schengen space, I think it's an illusion, to think that Viktor Orban could help Romania in this sense.
Do we have time for 2 minutes for the last answer to the last question? How was the mood in Slovakia?
Wow. So 2 minutes to settle Slovak-Hungarian differences. Wow. Look, we watch Viktor Orban's nationalist statements with vigilance, not worry. Vigilance in a sense that we realize the potential they hold to destroy peace in this part of Europe. But equally, we're not panicking in a sense that, for example, it is perfectly acceptable for any country to look after its own ethnic or linguistic community beyond the borders. We do that for the Slovaks, the few that remain in Hungary. And respect Hungary will want to do that with regard to a much more numerous Hungarian community living in Slovakia. We have a problem when that's done illegally, when bags of cash are being distributed, because that's corruption, that's against the law. Similarly, we have no problem, and as soon as I say we, this is actually something in common between the opposition and the government, when the Hungarian government contributes to restoration of cultural monuments. In Slovakia, we have a good and actually long, and for most of the time we live together within one borders, a very happy history of coexistence. We're together for 1,000 years. For vast majority of the 1,000 years, this was a fairly meritocratic society in which both ethnic Slovaks, ethnic Hungarians, ethnic Serbs rose to the ranks. I had the chance to rise through the ranks and make it in Budapest as much as ethnic Hungarians. In that sense, the old empire was very meritocratic. It was only the last 100 and even less so, sort of last 60 years of our coexistence, they were unhappy. But for the most part, again, we have a long shared history, and we recognize that Hungary will want to look after the monuments living in Slovakia. If anything, where we are hard on the government, my last point, because I'm aware of the time, where we're hard on the government is in not taking care of the monuments themselves. We leave it to Viktor Orban to fill a void, frankly, that the Slovak government ought to be. if we believe, as I do, that we have a good, long, and shared and by and large happy history of coexistence, these are our monuments as much as Hungarian monuments. They may be birth homes to historical figures that Hungary cherishes more than Slovakia, but we had a shared history at the time. These are, in some ways, our celebrities as much as Hungarian celebrities. And it's a shame for our government and our country not to be taking care of the monuments, of the castles, of the chateaus, the birth houses of so many important figures in our own shared history. So if anything, I think Viktor Orbán capitalizes on my own government's failure to look after what is a shared history. And that's for us to solve.
Thank you very much. I think time is over. So what a pity. And sorry to the audience for not having given you the opportunity to join us in giving questions. But I think we enjoyed some very, very profound and interesting and relevant comments from our panelists here in the room and at the screen in Paris. So thank you very much for your attention and for having been with us here. Thank you.